Welcome furniture friends to another video. In today's video I'm going to be looking at this little walnut table. I picked this up from a thrift store nearby. It was a grand total of $3. It's wobbly, it's dingy, the finish is shot, but I noticed this little sticker on the bottom. This is a Canadian made piece that is solid walnut. Even though it's a little rough, I feel like this is worthy of some TLC. I need to completely disassemble this piece to refinish it, so wish me luck. Stay tuned. My name is Angie and I refinish furniture. Sometimes I paint and sometimes I don't, but I always do what I can to save old pieces from the trash. Welcome to my workroom. Okay, so the crusty top is the least of my worries here with this piece. The bottom has clearly at some point had a repair that wasn't very good. There's a pretty significant wobble to it. I don't really know exactly how this is attached, so I'm basically just going to disassemble everything and do my best here. I'm obviously starting by unscrewing this board here from the bottom. This pedestal and pedestals like this, normally they are attached with a big dowel and some glue. So I'm assuming that's what's going on here as I'm just gently prying it up. It is coming. I can see there's a lot of wood glue underneath. Unfortunately, when I pry this off, I discovered that it was actually screwed in, and I don't know if that was original or not. It's possible, but this wood glue is definitely not the original wood glue. It's too messy. I would be shocked if a professional furniture maker did it that way. I'm also having a look at the underside here. These legs are normally held on with dowels, which you can actually see. We've got a dowel here and a dowel here, but they also have nails driven into the dowels, which is a little unusual. And then these brass cap feet are super cute, but they're really tarnished, so they need some love too. I'm just carefully testing this out here, trying to pry this up. If it had been more difficult than this, I absolutely would have grabbed my heat gun, but it came up fairly easily. There was one little piece of wood that stayed attached. That's not a problem, and actually that's going to help me put this back in the same spot. Looking at these screws, I'm thinking that they probably were original. They're so rusty and cruddy, I had to actually scrape them off. Speaking of scraping, I have to get the rest of this dried glue off, and you can see the difference between the original glue, which is that dark brown, almost black stuff, and then the wood glue, which was clearly some repair at some point, which is the lighter, almost white color. I'm not doing a full refinish on the bottom here, but I am going to clean it up a little bit. So I'm just giving it a really light sanding. I believe this is about a 180. I'm also trying to remove some of that excess glue. And of course, as I'm sanding here, I'm going to be careful to avoid that original label. Now, I usually don't like removing anything handwritten like pencil marks and measurements. I love that about older pieces, but sometimes they just have to go. In this case, it's hidden underneath anyway, and I need the area under that board to be as fresh as possible so that the new wood glue is going to hold it. Some of the original glue was just on there so much I had to actually chisel it off, and I'm not great with a chisel. I'm the first to admit it, but it is doing a good job of getting rid of that glue. A sharpened wood scraper would work really well for this as well. I'm trying to be careful when I'm sanding here that I'm not sanding that little piece of wood that tore off. I don't want to sand that flat because that's going to hopefully sit right back in the same spot that it initially was. That number that's written there is kind of neat. If there wasn't a number sign in front of it, I would be inclined to think it was the date that this was made. Moving on to the top now. So because this is solid walnut and the finish is failing quite terribly, I'm actually going to go straight in with my sander with a 180 grit, which is fairly fine, but I don't think it's going to have any issue cutting through this old finish. If this was a veneer instead of solid walnut, I absolutely would have scraped it. It would have scraped beautifully because it's so flaky. But being what it is, I just jumped right in with my sander, and I'm actually going to be finishing this with ODIE'S oil, so I'm going to be sanding it a little bit smoother than I would if I was staining or painting. This has to be the most satisfying thing ever next to scraping paint off furniture. I love that. Which is probably a strange thing to say considering I do paint furniture sometimes. Going slow with very light pressure is key when you're sanding with an orbital sander. You can see here I'm actually going to move to 3 fingers. So I'm barely pressing down on this and you can see it's still doing its job. Now if you were to do that with say 3 fingers and it wasn't cutting into the finish anymore, then you're either using the wrong grit, you are using too much pressure, or the finish is just too thick to jump right in with sanding, in which case I would recommend either scraping or stripping it first. I'm pretty good with an orbital sander. I wouldn't recommend trying to do this section if you're just starting out with orbitals, but I am using my orbital here for this flat part. I'm going to be hand sanding the underside of it here, and then this decorative bit here on the top. So I'm going to be sanding the top of this piece up to 600 grit, but not the sides or the legs. Those parts I'm starting here with the 180 just like I did on the top, and then I'll move to 220 and then 320, but that's where I'm going to stop for the sides and the legs. The main reason I'm going to 600 on the top is because I want there to be a little bit more of a sheen, but that's not going to be required on the sides or the base. So generally speaking, when you're using ODIE'S oil, the higher the grit you sand to, the more sheen you're going to get out of the finish. Let me tell you, hand sanding is a workout. I love my orbital sander. Moving along now to these brass capped feet, they have these little nails in the sides, and this tool is really going to help me pull those out. This was a gift from Blake and Claire, so thank you Blake and Claire. I'm told Blake is an electrician and this tool was highly recommended, which is awesome. My partner is actually also an electrician, but I don't get to use those tools. Decades and decades of dust and dirt. I'm just gonna tap that stuff out. One thing I'm going to do is actually mark the leg and the foot, the little brass foot that I just pulled off, so that I can put the right one back on the right leg. I also, unfortunately, have to remove all of these nails to take the legs off because these nails are driven down into the dowels in the leg. I've never seen that before, at least not with so many nails. So there's a dowel here and a dowel here, and then the top dowel has 2 nails driven into it, which I guess just helps hold it on. I don't love that, but it is what it is. If you're ever removing something like this with dowels in it, make sure you try to keep it level as you're pulling it off. You don't want to crank one side of it and risk breaking the dowel. Just do a little bit on one side, move to the other side, do a little bit there, and just kind of level it out. Does that make any sense? Oh my gosh. All of this glue has to come off before I can put this back together. It's a pain in the butt. I almost had a give up moment there. I did this way for a short bit, but then I went and grabbed my heat gun And just on the lowest setting, just tried to warm it up enough that I could more easily scrape it off. And you can see here, it is a little bit more pliable. It was still difficult, but so much easier than when it was hard. Be careful if you're sanding glue off a dowel. You don't want to make the dowel much smaller than it is, or you're going to lose that nice fit. So I'm mostly going around the dowel here. I just did a really light, quick bit around. You'll see too when I go to sand the legs that a little area where the brass cap feet go, I don't really sand that too much there as well for the same reason. So there's one thing about the construction here, this pedestal piece, that I don't like. You can see that these little, I'm not even sure what you'd call them, these little round pieces that are glued on, they don't sit completely flush. They stick up a little bit on the sides. I pressed down on all of them to make sure that they were tight and not loose, needing to be glued, and they were all good. So I'm just going to sand them down a little bit, and then you'll see in a little while what else I do to help fix that. So I'm sanding here with a 180 grit, the same as the top. There wasn't nearly as thick a finish on the legs, which is pretty typical. And again, like I mentioned a second ago, I'm being careful not to take too much off of the feet because I want those brass caps to fit exactly the same as they did before I took them off. I'm just doing a light sanding on the underside here, and then the top part with the grooves I'm going to be hand sanding. I find a lot of people don't realize exactly how much work goes into refinishing a piece like this. Oftentimes I'll see them with the tops refinished, like with the wood grain, and then the bases painted, and those are super cute too, but I just didn't want to paint this one for some reason. And I knew I'd be shooting myself in the foot a little bit because it's an older style. Not everyone wants this style in their homes anymore. It's not very modern, I guess, for lack of a better term. So I knew it would be a harder sell. At the moment of me doing this voiceover, it has actually been on my page for, I think, 2 weeks, roughly. And it still hasn't sold, and it's only priced at $175 plus tax, Canadian. That's a steal. You cannot buy this wood for that price, and obviously you certainly can't manufacture a piece for that price. Not to mention my time and effort that went into it, but because of the style that it is, I knew that it was going to sit for a while, and that's something you have to think about if this is something you want to do as a living. I love restoring older pieces like this, but man, they don't sell as well as the mid-century stuff and the painted pieces. They just don't, so it's just something to consider. And it just wouldn't be one of my videos if I wasn't accidentally flipping all you people off with my little finger. I don't know why I always use that finger to do everything. I'm so sorry. What I'm doing is just pushing this into the cracks and hopefully ending up with a nice smooth piece when I sand it down once it's dry. A pretty common mistake newbies make when they're learning to sand is they don't change their sanding pads enough. You can see my little sand pad graveyard over here. This is my second sanding of 220 grit, and as I mentioned before, I'm then going to be going to 320 grit on here. This is already buttery smooth at 320, but I need that extra sheen when I apply the ODIE'S, so I'm doing a 600 grit hand sand. This is just some mineral spirits to help clean up the surface, and it also gives me a really good look at what this piece would look like with just a clear finish on it, which is what it's getting. I'm going to be setting the top aside to dry overnight. It is now the end of day 1. And just before I call it quits for the night, I'm going to go in and polish up these feet. And when I say polish up, I'm not trying to make these look brand new. I certainly could. I could remove probably 90% of the tarnish on there, but I don't want the feet to look brand new. I love that little bit of tarnish and patina, so I'm just trying to find a nice mix here. And just comparing it now to one that hasn't been polished yet, you can see that I've basically buffed up the high areas, left some of the tarnish in the low areas. I think this is perfect for what I want to do. This has also dried overnight, so I'm just giving it a nice light hand sanding here to smooth everything out. And then we can move on to starting to reassemble this beast. I had these just loosely set in here overnight while the mineral spirits was drying. So I'm going to take them apart and we can get to work with the glue up. So for the legs, I'm just putting a little bit of glue here in between the dowels and then a tiny bit on the tip of the dowel. Generally speaking, you don't ever want to completely glue a dowel in a situation like this where you might have to take it apart later on, because you would destroy the dowel trying to pull it out. If you could even get it out, probably wouldn't be able to. So just a little bit on the tip of the dowel will help hold it in, but would still be able to be removed down the road if another repair was needed. So the time has come now for me to put this back on. Now this just seemed a little bit lopsided, so I grabbed my measuring tape and to my surprise, it wasn't directly in the middle, which I found odd. So I moved it over. It was maybe 1/4 of an inch roughly off. So I just made sure that it was completely in the center, drew a line. That looks better, and it's probably honestly why it was a little bit lopsided to begin with. I also checked these measurements to make sure these were even. I want to make sure I'm putting this back on the right way, so I'm just using this nail to help me figure out the orientation here, and this looks good. So just getting this screwed back together. Adding some fresh glue to the underside of the top and screwing everything down. The nature of tables like this with a single pedestal is that they do sometimes have some side-to-side movement, but we just don't want wobbly. It was very wobbly before. I have no doubt that this is going to be so much better. I think I can officially call this the home stretch now. Everything is put back together, I'm going to be using two different ODIE'S products on this piece. First up is the ODIE'S Universal Oil, which you've seen me use many times in my videos. You want to stir it up well. I apply it with a Mirka Mirlon pad, and this is something you really need to work into the wood grain. So generally I put it on with small circular motions, working it back and forth, trying to get in every little crack and every little pore. The less you use of this, the better. You don't want to use too much. Number one, because you're going to waste it. You put this stuff on and then you wipe it off. So if you put too much on to begin with, firstly, it's going to be hard to take it all off. And secondly, you just wasted all that extra product. And the product is not cheap. A little goes a long way, and it's pretty much a miraculous product. But yeah, you don't want to be wasting this stuff. The ODIE'S smell, it's a thing. It smells so good, trust me. The Universal Oil I'm going to be leaving on for about an hour to an hour and a half, and then I'm going to go in and buff it all off. Why do I love ODIE'S oil so much? ODIE'S is great for pretty much every species of wood imaginable, including the super oily woods like teak. It basically goes on like an oil, but behaves and dries like a hard wax. So it's going to get better with age and be more and more durable down the road. It contains natural UV inhibitors. I personally haven't used this on exterior wood, but I'm told that it can be used on exterior wood. It's great for cutting boards and countertops. It's completely food safe, non-toxic. It's made by hand in the USA in small batches, and I personally have pieces in my home that I used ODIE'S on over a year ago, and they still look perfect. And we're talking everyday use. It's actually my coffee table. A lot of people ask me because they think of this as a more traditional wax where you'd have to reapply it every so often. With the ODIE'S, as long as you're taking care of your furniture and using coasters and not putting like things that are super hot or damp on your pieces, this stuff is going to last a really long time. You can reapply it, it's really easy to do so. It really just depends on what the piece is and what its purpose is, what you're using it for, etc. After letting this first coat of ODIE'S sit for about 24 hours, I'm going on to my next product, which is the ODIE'S Wood Butter, and I'm using the same sort of pad to apply it. The butter is sort of a combination between the ODIE'S Hard Wax and the ODIE'S Universal Oil. It's sort of in the middle. It's not super hard, but it's definitely not runny like the oil, and it has a higher wax content. I actually like the wood butter better than the wax because it's a little bit easier to apply. Once I've applied the wood butter, I'm going to let this sit on for about 45 minutes or so and then buff it off the same way I did the ODIE'S Universal Oil. I love this little table. I love how it turned out. Even though the whole thing is made of solid walnut, the top, I don't know if it's a different species or just a different cut of it, but it's a little bit darker than the base. That's okay. I could have stained the base to match the top a bit better, but I wanted to leave this as natural as possible. So having a look back at what I started with, this crusty, wobbly table that I picked up for $3 at a thrift shop. This has been completely resurrected. You couldn't even see the beauty of the walnut wood grain through this old finish. It was just so dull and opaque, and I can't wait for you to see it now. Thanks for watching.